In today's video, going to be taking a look at a couple of polls that have come out today. First, looking at the state of North Carolina, we have an Emerson poll for that 2020 Democratic primary and some general election numbers. And then after that, going to be taking a look at the national numbers from this past month's CNN results and comparing it to recent months to see how things have changed. So starting off here in North Carolina, this is a relatively decent size sample for a state-specific result for these general election numbers, that number being 932 registered voters with a margin of error of 3.1 percentage points. And Trump's approval numbers not great here, 11 points underwater, 41% approve compared to 52% disapprove in this North Carolina poll. And you might say, well, this is just one result and one data point, which is very fair. And it does feel like it's a little bit more skewed in positive favor of the Democrats than what you typically might expect in a state like North Carolina, but a data point nonetheless for the Democrats to build off of as they try to pick up a state like North Carolina going into 2020, and not just their presidential general election matchup, but also a pretty important Senate race in this state as well. So you can see Biden doing the best here amongst the top 2020 Democratic hopefuls, leading Trump in this one by 12 percentage points. Sanders also doing very well for himself, up by 8 percentage points. Buttigieg up by 4 percentage points. And then we have Warren and Harris, who are viewed as two of the stronger women candidates in this 2020 Democratic field, but not doing quite as well here in the state of North Carolina. Warren, a 50-50 tie with Trump, and Kamala Harris losing by 2 percentage points. And then we go down and take a look at the North Carolina Democratic primary, and obviously you're going to have a little bit smaller of a sample size here because it just takes those Democratic primary voters from the larger sample size. So we have 397 respondents here with that margin of error at nearly around 5 percentage points. So take this particular result with a little less confidence than those general election matchups. So we have Biden leading the way, and this has been a pretty consistent trend here. Biden leading with 39% of the vote. And then you have Sanders and Warren at a decent second and third place in comparison to where the rest of the field is at. You have Sanders at 22% support, Elizabeth Warren at 15%. And to be part of the group that divvies up those pledged delegates, you have to reach at least a threshold of 15% of support. So Warren being here at that 15% number is pretty important for her. And it does feel like Warren has been gaining in the polls in recent weeks, and it's almost kind of evolving into a three-horse race amongst some of these older candidates that we have in the 2020 Democratic primary field with Biden, Sanders, and Warren, with the other candidates not having quite as much success in gaining the kind of traction they need to push their way into that upper group. So we have Buttigieg here at 8% support. A disappointing result again here for Kamala Harris at just 5%. Beto O'Rourke at 3%. Klobuchar at 1%, Andrew Yang at 1%. That's actually a decent number for him, considering this is a guy that was a complete unknown coming into this 2020 process, and the fact that he's consistently outperforming a lot of these other candidates that have been in the Democratic Party. They've run for office. They're serving in Washington as a part of Congress, or maybe they're a governor, or, everything in between that. The fact that Andrew Yang is actually polling above people like a Cory Booker or a Kirsten Gillibrand, it's actually pretty impressive in my opinion, even though he's only at 1 percentage point. I kind of have this rule of thumb where if you're not able to outperform Andrew Yang in these particular 2020 Democratic primary polls that we're seeing, then you're probably going to be in a position where you're going to have a hard time gaining the type of traction needed to seriously push your way into the legitimate contenders field. A really bad number here for Booker at just 1%, as well as Gillibrand. These are two viewed as up-and-comers within the Democratic establishment, and once they made their announcement, especially if you saw it on the mainstream media, there was a lot of people that felt like these are the kind of candidates that could maybe make some kind of noise and gain some traction, but that just hasn't been the case. And Booker actually and Gillibrand have kind of been reducing their numbers in the polls in recent months, and then behind them, pretty much all the other candidates are at around 0 percentage points. So then we're going to go down and take a look at how these trends break down among some of these candidates. So amongst registered Democrats, Biden is really taking it to Bernie Sanders amongst this voter demographic, leading him 42% to 19%. But among independent voters, Sanders has a lead over Biden, 34% to 26%. And this is a statistic that we need to keep in mind heading towards the Democratic primary process, because there are states that have open primaries, semi-open primaries, or closed primaries. In those states that have closed primaries, Sanders is likely not to do as well as you might expect him to, because amongst registered Democrats, Biden is doing quite a bit better than Bernie Sanders, in contrast to when progressive voters, maybe people that aren't registered as Democrats or just independent-leaning voters, that is where Sanders should be able to have some type of a lead over Biden and maybe have better results in those open primary states or semi-open primary states than you might expect otherwise. So that is something to keep in mind. And then also taking a look here at how the demographics break down amongst white voters, Biden has a slight lead over Bernie, but still here, Bernie Sanders is having his issues getting these, I don't know if I'd call North Carolina a southern state, but I mean, it's getting kind of down there towards the southeastern states where Bernie did not do very well back in 2016. And amongst these southeastern African-American voters is where Bernie really struggled. And you're seeing that continue here in the state of North Carolina, where Biden has 58% of the African-American vote compared to Sanders, who's at just 14%. And also Kamala Harris, maybe not doing quite as well amongst this voter bloc as she would be hoping to do at this point in the process, but still very early on. And then Sanders continuing to do quite well amongst the younger voters, 38%, those between 18 to 29, followed by Elizabeth Warren, and then Biden only getting 11% of the young vote in comparison to kind of more of your mid-tier age voters, 30 to 49, where Sanders and Biden are virtually tied. Sanders was just a slight lead there, 34 to 32%. And then voters over the age of 50, Biden absolutely crushing Sanders with these voters in another poll here. He has 50% in comparison to Bernie, who's at just 10% of support. And I just want to take a couple of more looks at the data in this particular Emerson poll. So they asked, I will definitely vote for this candidate, or there's a chance I could change my mind. And those Biden voters here are the most entrenched into their support for his candidacy. And then Sanders behind him with 41% of people that are definitely voting for him, in contrast to Biden, who's at 53%. And then the other top candidates, Harris, Warren, Buttigieg, their voters seem like they could be swayed in one direction or another. So if you're Bernie Sanders, you're in second place right now. Overall, you're hoping to get these voters who are not as committed to some of these candidates who aren't doing quite as well. He's trying to peel off these types of voters to get behind his candidacy to try to close that gap between himself and Biden. And then just one other number I wanted to take a look at here, and that's this Senate race. And again, like I said earlier in the video, this does feel a little bit more favorable of a poll towards the Democrats than what you might expect in a state like North Carolina. And we're seeing that here in this Senate race. So a potential Democratic opponent in the state Senate race, Democrat Erica Smith, actually leads current Republican incumbent Tom Tillis by 7 percentage points, 46% to 39%, with 15% of the voters undecided. And this is a very positive poll here for the Democrats, but just one data point to work off of at this early on portion of the process. So now, after taking a look at these Emerson numbers, now I want to go ahead and take a look at the CNN numbers that just came out. So this is a sample size here of 412, so we're not looking at a massive sample size here by any means, but Biden's numbers coming down quite a bit from where they were last month. Bernie gaining a bit, Kamala Harris gaining a little bit here, and it's a situation where Biden, of course, he got that announcement bump. He made his announcement, he boosted up quite a bit there to 39 percentage points, but that has receded back here somewhat significantly, I'd say. 7 percentage points, that's quite a difference here. So Biden at 32% support in the most recent numbers. Bernie Sanders gaining a bit from where he was back in April, up to 18% support. So if you're the other Democratic candidates and you're trying to close this margin with Joe Biden, he got that big boost after he made his announcement, but you want to start to see those numbers receding a bit as you're trying to make up that ground. And losing 7 percentage points in just a 1 month span is a pretty positive sign here for these other candidates. So you have Bernie Sanders. We take a look last month, he was down by 24 percentage points to Biden, and now in this one it's at 14%. So that's a 10-point gain just looking at those numbers. And then we see Kamala Harris here. She dropped considerably going into April by 7 percentage points. She has gained some of those numbers back up to 8% of support. And actually a little bit surprising in this particular poll, we see Elizabeth Warren go down by 1 percentage point. In general, we've been seeing Warren trend in a positive direction where she's been getting more support, but that's not showing here in this particular national number from CNN. But those are the two polls I wanted to touch on here in this video. If you want to look at all of the data from these results for yourself, I'll have links to these polls down in the video description. That's going to wrap this one up, guys. So thanks for stopping by. Consider subscribing for more of this poll type analysis content in the future, and I hope to see you for those future videos.